Welcome to this edition of Transformation Thursday. It is such a blessing to be here, and such a blessing to share this space with you. Some years ago, I was being evaluated on my job, being evaluated for my performance. And I can recall my supervisor called me into his office, asked me to sit down. And he began to offer me some feedback on my performance up to that point. It's a typical annual review. He pointed out some good things that I had done, and pointing out that he thought that I was a good thinker. He told me, he said, "You have some great ideas. You have great thoughts for projects. Great thoughts for how to move things forward." But then he said something that caught me off guard. He said, "Sometimes you fail to finish." Again, his words caught me off guard. He said, "You have great thoughts, you have great ideas, but you often fail to finish." His point made me somewhat angry at the time. But the more I thought about him, he was actually true. As I began to look at my bookshelf, I noticed that there were books that were unread. I had started them, but they were unread. There are some programs that I wrote down in my planner. There were great programs, great ideas, but they're never implemented. There are some lives I wanted to make a big difference in, but I never did it. There's some schematics of some projects that I wanted to do, but they were never completed. I saw some old plans that were never finished. And maybe like many of you, in my mind, I had great justification for why it didn't get done. And great justification for why the change of course, why the book wasn't read, why the project wasn't finished, why I stopped working out. What I've come to realize is that it's easy to keep going when you're winning. It's easy to keep pushing through when you see results. It's easy to keep dieting when the weight is coming off. It's easy to keep reading when you have nothing else to do. It's easy to keep pushing when everybody's on board. It's easy to dream it, but it's harder to live it. It's hard to live because finishing requires you to push through when the weight stops coming off. It requires you to keep going when you fail the test, to keep fighting when you're losing, to keep learning when you are tired and exhausted, to stay committed when no one else is on board, to stay in when you are the only one fighting. What I've come to realize is that I'm not the only one that have some unfinished letters, some half-read books, some uncompleted projects, some unfinished relationships. And there's so many people that have left here with work undone. I was listening to a story about a man who spent a decade or so in prison. But once he got out, he went on to become a millionaire. And in an interview, he was asked, "How did you beat the odds?" And he said, "In prison, many inmates decorate their cells, their prison cells. They put up pictures of girlfriends and wives, pictures of children. They paint and inscribe murals." And he said, "I did none of that." Why? He said, "Because I didn't want to make this my home." And too many of us make our prison our home. And so we keep going back home. We keep going back to the hell that we have been delivered from. We keep going back to what God has set us free from. We keep going back to the sin that so easily besets us and ensnares us. We keep going back to debt that he has released us from. We keep going back to old habits he has delivered us from. We have become conformed to this world and institutionalized by its values, captured by the deceitfulness of riches. We have made this world our home. But God said we're just pilgrims passing through on our way to a better place. Paul says in Romans chapter 7, he says, there is something in me that keeps going back. You remember what he said? Paul says that even when I want to do right, I find myself doing wrong. And the wrong that I don't want to do, I find myself doing. And he would go on to say, oh, wretched man that I am. Is this cry that so many of us share, a cry of defeat, a cry of why do I keep going back to the same things over and over again? Why do I keep going back to the life that I've been set free from? I'm free from it. I have the power to walk in that freedom, but oftentimes we don't. Jesus gave us this powerful promise in John chapter 10 and verse number 10. He said, I came that you may have life and that you may have it more abundantly. And as Christians, many of us recognize the life-giving power of Christ. We're filled with him. We're saved by him, but we're still tied down to the things of this world. We're still tied down to our flesh, tied down to our old ways, old thinking, old behaviors. And too many of us are living lives of defeat. But God is calling us to a victorious life, a life of abundance. An abundant life is a life lived on purpose and in purpose. A life of meaning, a life filled with joy, with victory, a life lived walking on the water and not being drowned by it. A life lived as a conqueror, a life lived overcoming. And so how do we live this type of life? I enjoyed watching the 16 days of the Olympics. And there's so many events that I just really, really enjoyed watching. One of my favorite events is track and field and watching the 100 meters where Noah Lyles was trying to get that coveted gold. And as he was running, it was a photo finish because he was behind most of the race, but right at the very end, he leaned with all of himself. He leaned. And because of his lean, he won the race by point hundredths of a second. He leaned in. How do we live this type of life? We have to learn how to lean in. Leaning in requires us putting all of ourselves into it. Putting all of ourselves into finishing, into our passion, into our promise. At some point in each of our lives, we have to decide to lean into our promise, to lean wholeheartedly into our destiny, to lean into a new life, to lean into the new you, the better you. And Jesus showed us how to lean in. In Matthew chapter 26 and verse number 36, Jesus is in a place called Gethsemane, and we've talked about this before, but it was in Gethsemane where he totally leaned in. It was this place where the Bible says that he prayed until sweat flowed and dropped like blood down his face. It was there where he will tell his disciples to pray because he said, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And because our flesh is weak, then we have to pull and push everything into it, to lean fully into it. And Jesus tells the disciples, he says, pray so that you can put it all in. But not only did he say pray, but he said you have to empty yourself into your thing. Whatever that thing is, whatever that destiny is, whatever that promise is, whatever that idea is, that dream is, you got to empty yourself into it. Totally leaning into it. And finally, Jesus says, as he gets to that point, he says, not my will, but yours be done, God. Because to lean in, not only do we need to pray and empty ourselves, but we got to trust in God. We got to trust in him. Learn how to lean in, to put everything and all of you into your promise, into your destiny, into what God has for you. I was listening to something just recently, and it talked about pain. And we'll talk about this at another day, but it talked about pain. And it says, leaning fully in will cost you some pain. It will bring some pain. On the flip side of that, not leaning in will also cost you some pain. And so if both will cause pain, then why not lean in? And so on this Transformation Thursday, I want you to affirm with me that I will lean in to my purpose, my promise, and my destiny. I will put my all into it. That's our thought on this Transformation Thursday. See you next week.